Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and get started. We may have some others joining us soon, but we'll get the event going. Okay, so just introduce myself. My name is Katie, and I'm the program coordinator here at Teen Treks. And this is our bike touring educational series where we like to host different events to help get people involved in the bike touring world, but also feature some of our trips and talk about them in a little more detail as people are trying to decide the trips. And I also see we have 2 people here who already signed up for the Across America trip, which is really exciting. So yeah, tonight's event is all about the Across America trek. And we, just to give you a little bit of info on that trek, that is a 3,800-mile journey. It is our longest trip. We've been running it for about 20 years. Not every year we get to run it, but when we get enough kids signed up for it, we get to do it. And it's a 56-day journey. So it's a long trip. It takes most of the summer, starting in Portland, Oregon, and finishing in New York City. And that trip is typically the kids will do anywhere from 60 to 85 miles per day. Every group is different, and some of them want to get in more miles per day, and they will typically all get stronger and stronger as they go. And so I know some of them will push the limits on the miles per day. It is definitely a challenging trip, one that you do want to prepare for. And it's what I would think is the most rewarding trip you could do here at Teen Treks, and something that's really special to do as a teenager, to know that you've accomplished such a big goal. And anytime you accomplish a big feat like that, it makes you kind of feel like you could do anything. And the amount of experiences that you can have along that journey are just exciting to think about. And so today we have Tyler Madell with us, who I'm going to introduce here in a minute, but he's going to be talking about the Across America trek. And I'm going to ask him some questions all about this trip. And then I'll spend about 15 minutes doing that. And then I'll open it up about 7:20 for other people to have questions for Tyler or myself to answer more about this trip, or anything about Teen Treks that you want to know more about, or bike touring or gear, anything like that. We can try to answer you as best as possible. So we'll end at about 7:30. We like to keep these short so that people can get to dinner and all the things they need to do at home. So if you guys just don't mind keeping your camera or your microphones muted for the time being, that'd be great. And then, like I said, at 7:20, I'll open up for questions. And if you do have any questions along the way, just write it down or something like that, or you can enter it in the chat, and that way I can come back to it later. Okay, so just to get us started, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Tyler Madell. So Tyler had the wonderful pleasure of growing up around Teen Treks. He's actually the son of Cliff Madell, who's our executive director and founder of Teen Treks. And so Tyler not only got to meet all the leaders and see all the trips going out as a kid, he eventually got to be a trekker, and then that's where he got to do this Across America trip. And then eventually Tyler became a leader. And between his experience with leading treks and also being a trekker on the treks, pretty sure he's done every trip on Teen Treks itinerary, if not multiple times for some of them. And then, of course, having a love for bike touring, Tyler has done a lot of his own bike tours, personal trips by himself or with others. So he's pretty much an expert in the field of, or the activity of bike touring. So he not only got to do the Across America trip on his as a trekker for Teen Treks, but he also did it as a young adult on his own, which is really exciting. So we'll try to ask him questions from both of those angles, but he can kind of speak today on what it was like to be a trekker, and also having a leadership experience and that overview of this trip. He can kind of speak from that angle as well. So Tyler, I just want to welcome you. And just to get us going, I'm going to let Tyler tell us a little bit about like what he does now for work, and what are some of your interests and hobbies, and just tell us a little bit about who you are for everybody else, Tyler.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks for having me, Katie, and great to meet everyone. So yeah, right now, I work kind of through my experiences bike touring. I got interested in urban planning, and now I work planning. I work at a nonprofit that plans and operates bike share programs in smaller mid-sized cities around the country. So we, kind of extending my love of biking and also intersecting with new technologies, bike maintenance, organizing programs, but also getting more people biking in smaller cities. So it's been really great to do that and kind of evolved my love of biking from just bike touring to this as well. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Thanks for sharing. All right, so let's go straight into talking about this Across America trip. And I want to know, how old were you at the time whenever you did the trip, and what did you always know you wanted to do this trip? What led you to want to do this?
Yeah, so I did the Cross America Teen Treks trip when I was 17 years old. So I think I was going into my senior year in high school at the time. And at that age was kind of about average for my group. There was a bunch of people, bunch of other trekkers on the trip that were 16. There was one that was 15, I think even. And then there was, I think maybe 2 or 3 that were 18 as well. So going into college, I was kind of about average for that group. And there were 8 of us trekkers and the 2 leaders for that trip. And yeah, maybe backing up a little bit. So as Katie said, I did a lot of teen treks trips as a kid. And a few years before the Cross America trip, I remember I was on one of the teen treks trips, and the trip leader, we were at a hostel, and the trip leader was looking at a map of the United States. We kind of had some downtime. I think some of the kids were, getting ready, showering after the trip, after, biking all day. Other kids were making food. But I asked the leader what he was doing looking at this map of the United States. And he was saying, "Oh, I'm thinking of biking across the country, sometime soon." And the thought had never occurred to me that you could bike across the country. I'd already done a few, smaller trips, the teen trek trips, New York City to Montreal, things like that are, very far distance themselves. But to think that you could bike across the country, that hadn't crossed my mind as something that people do normally. So I think I was like 13 at that time. So anyway, and that was before Teen Treks had an Across America trip. So we, after that summer, I was talking to my dad and some of the other folks at Teen Treks. I was like, "Oh, is there a way we could do a Cross America trip?" And that was kind of, I think there was already plans to do an Across America trip, but that was, in my mind, that's kind of where it began. Yeah, I kind of helped plan the routes initially, just trying to plan a route that was, not too difficult, trying to avoid some of the main mountain ranges, but also staying on more the northern side of the US, where it's not quite as hot as the South, especially the Southeast. And still going through some amazing places along the way. Yeah, so does that answer the question, Katie?
Yeah. So you first found out about that at age 13, and then you knew since then that you wanted to do that trip yourself, and you helped plan it. That's amazing. I didn't even know that part. Okay, cool. So for someone that is planning to do this trip or wanting to do this trip, it can sound daunting to, be on the road for 56 days and do 3,800 miles if you're not used to doing something like that. So did you have any sort of inhibitions going into this? I know it sounds like you were excited, but were you nervous about anything mentally or physically for this trip? And if so, how did you prepare for that?
Yeah, I guess I was a little nervous about, being physically up for it, because biking, definitely biking that far total, but also just biking that far each day was something I hadn't really done too much of before. So to prepare, I went on a few longer rides. I think I went like on an 80-mile ride one day, just kind of around here in Western New York. So that kind of helped me feel, I guess, more self-confident on it. And I guess I was also concerned about the group dynamic too going into it. You know, it's one thing to be, um, you know, making sure myself I could do the biking, but also just the group dynamic too. You know, as we're traveling as a group, we're only as fast as the slowest person, and not only just biking speed, but just like um, you know, working as a group to make all the food together efficiently, to clean up after each other. So that was something I probably was a little more worried about or concerned about going into it, because I'd seen on other teen trek strips, like that's, to me, that was the kind of the thing that, you know, it's a lot to bike 70 miles in a day and do all the other things you do on a teen trek strip. So it is a lot to pack in a day, but um, I think I mean, we had a really great group, and it all worked out fine, and I really had nothing to be nervous about. I mean, I think we worked really well together, you know, throughout the day, and we all came to it with different experience levels too. So I probably had the most experience, you know, bike touring and doing teen trek strips. We had a few other people that had been on a few teen trek strips themselves, but there were also a lot of people on the trip that had never been on a teen trek strip, never done a bike trip even. And one kid had never even really camped before. So this was like his first camping experience, which we all found kind of hilarious in the beginning. But he did just fine too. Um, yeah.
Okay. Um, so how long would you say it took you all to sort of get not only in the cadence of doing that kind of daily biking, but also where your group was becoming more and more cohesive and learning the daily rules and what it meant to, make that kind of mileage happen every single day?
Maybe like a week, which meant we were in Idaho at that point. We'd already crossed one state.
Okay. A week is not as long as I thought you were going to say. That's amazing.
I mean, there were elements of it that took longer, but
Yeah,
I feel like we got pretty much in our groove in that first week.
that's great.
We already, you know, as happens on the teen treks, we already had our kind of group inside jokes at that point that we all thought were funny, that, you know, people that we'd meet along the way have no idea what we're talking about. So that's a good measure for me of like when you hit your groove on one of these bike trips.
That's a good measure. Okay, well, speaking about groups, so you probably, I mean, having done this as a teenager in a group setting, and then you got to do this later as an individual, and I'm sure they both had their own pros and cons. But can you, as a teenager, 17 years old, in a group like this, what are some of the benefits of doing an across America trip in a group that you found?
I mean, I think one of the big things was we all kind of learned from each other and kind of the things that we wanted to prioritize on the way. I think one of the great things about the structure of teen treks, especially the Cross America trip, is that there's not a set daily itinerary for the whole thing. So we sort of adjusted our route based off of where, you know, people in the group wanted to go. We'd spend more time in places that, you know, people wanted to spend more time in. So, for example, we went by Devil's Tower in Wyoming, which I had never heard of before, but one of the other kids on the trip was really wanting to go there, and we weren't that far away, so we made a little detour and went by Devil's Tower. So that, I mean, that's a great element of being in a group. Also, the food I think is much better traveling in a group than traveling on a teen trek trip. I definitely ate much better on the teen trek trip than I did when I did the trip on my own across America. You know, having a group of, you know, 8 to 10 to 12 people, sharing responsibilities of cooking. A lot of times you'll be cooking and eating some very interesting things, and we had a lot of good cooks on the trip too. So that, and I think some people honed in their cooking too, you know, on the trip. So that was a good element too.
That is great. Um, okay, I wanted to ask you too, for someone that maybe is not as familiar with self-supported bike touring. There are, lots of options out there to do a trip like this with support vehicle. What would you say some of the benefits are of the self-contained style of bike touring across America?
Yeah, I mean, I've never done a self-supported tour, but I think it's my, I guess, intuition that, or belief that, especially for kids groups, I think it's really great to do a self-supported tour, because not, I mean, you might look at teen treks or just bike, kind of these bike trips in general, and on the surface, it just seems like you're biking all day and that's it. But there's so many more layers to it. I mean, there's the, you know, the cooking, as I mentioned, the sightseeing, but also I think a big part of it is just learning um, as a young person, just different skills, kind of really great life skills, really great, you know, learning how to interact with people along the road too. And I forgot where I was going. What was the question again?
Doing a bike trip like this,
Oh
self-contained
yeah.
versus like with a support vehicle.
Yeah. So, and if you're self-supported, I think you have to kind of problem solve more as a group, and kind of figure things out. So when things go wrong, um, usually something, especially on a cross America trip, at some point there's going to be some kind of issue with someone's bike. We didn't have anything too major. There were, I think, probably the biggest thing was at one point, someone um, tacoed their wheel, which means that the wheel, they had a minor crash, and their wheel was so bent out of shape that it wouldn't spin anymore. So luckily we actually made friends in the bike shop, with the bike shop in the town 20 miles back, and they came and brought us a new wheel. Um, but I think it's a good lesson in problem solving. I think I would say for traveling self-supported, and it gives you more flexibility too.
Definitely. Okay, along those lines, I know that there's a lot of questions I still have, but I'm gonna get ready to allow other people to ask questions. But I do kind of want to wrap this up with you, you know, now being able to look back on this trip and seeing the kind of person you are and the work you do and the values you have today. What what would you say is the benefit of a teenager doing a trip like this? Like, have you found any later impacts in your life because of the opportunity you had to do an across America trip as a teenager?
Yeah, I mean that there's a lot that I could say there, but I mean a few things that come top to mind is just kind of seeing the country on the ground, and meeting people along the way. You know, I think our group met so many people along the way.
Mm.
A lot of small towns, you know, just showing up. We'd probably look absolutely ridiculous to anyone that saw us. 10 people on a bike, 10 people on bikes. So immediately would start conversations with people in these small towns. And you know, I've lived most of my life in Buffalo, New York, and it's a big country out there, and I think we have, and increasingly so in this day and age, we have a lot of conceptions about, you know, what people are like in different parts of the country, especially if we haven't been there before. So I think it's a great way to kind of break down those barriers, and see, and talk to people, and just have these memories of what it's like in all these really diverse places, across the country.
That's awesome. Okay, perfect. So uh, I'm going to allow other people to ask questions. If you don't have questions, I have more for Tyler, but feel free to either just unmute and ask or enter them into the chat, and then I can ask as well. Specifically, if you want to know more of the logistics, like day to day, or just certain curiosities of what a trip like this would look like, feel free to ask those questions.
Well, I'll ask a question. Are you camping every day? Or is it kind of like some other trips where sometimes you're in a hostel or?
Yeah, we did majority camping, but it worked out to about once a week. We'd stay in a hostel or hotel.
Tyler, would
I
you?
gotta
Oh, go ahead.
So I've always wanted to do trips like this, but my parents wanted me to do a group one first. Um, I want to do the Great Divide, and then uh, think it's like the Trans-American Trail. Um, did how much did like these group trips help you with um, figuring out better ways to do it on your own too, if it did?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. It was great doing it as part of the group because I learned, different ways of traveling, I think, from, whether it's my fellow trekkers or the leaders. So kind of, I tend to be more of a shy person. So if I would imagine if I had just set out doing my own trips without having this experience of doing teen treks before, I probably wouldn't have been as willing to just talk to people, along the way. Maybe I'm taking a break in a park and try to strike up conversation because I would watch, my fellow trekkers do this or my leaders do this and see, how amazing it was to kind of have these experiences talking to people. So I would say that's one aspect of it. I mean, also just the kind of learning the more of the mechanics and skills of what it takes to do a bike trip. The learning about the different bike mechanics. We would learn a lot about how to fix our bikes on all of these trips, but especially the Cross America trip. So just fixing a flat tire, fixing spokes, adjusting the derailleurs, gears, things like that. Definitely learned a lot of that along the way. And, to some extent, like, you can learn that too, at a bike shop. But I think there's maybe different ways of doing it on the road too, to kind of troubleshoot with what you have. So I definitely picked up a lot of that and neat little tricks doing the group trips from the other people on the trip. Who's next?
Tyler, I wonder if you could give a brief overview of what a typical day on that trip would look like.
Yeah, that's a good question. So on the Cross America trip, we would wake up earlier typically than the other trips, maybe 6. And some days we waked up even earlier than that, if it was really hot, trying to get in some miles before it heated up. I think particularly kind of in the Midwest, there were some pretty hot days, and in the Midwest, some humid days. So we'd wake up, have breakfast, and then try to be on the road by like 7 or 8, and kind of bike throughout the day. Our group tend to drag out the biking day, I would say, compared to what I did when I was doing it by myself. So we may not get into where we were going until 6 or 7 or 8, maybe 9. If it was getting later, sometimes we'd have dinner somewhere along the way, maybe a quick thing that we could cook, or go out for dinner and then bike a little further.
Anybody else have questions?
I have a couple questions. So Sean's joining. I'm his mother, Jen.
Hi.
We are both we're coming from Massachusetts to Oregon. So we're looking at bags for the bike. I didn't know if you recommended any to fly the bike over. And then also he started training, and I was wondering how many days a week for the training, if there's like any certain protocols or anything that you followed to prep for it.
Those
I
are
could
great.
talk about like the training aspect, and Katie, if you want to talk about the shipping. But I would say for training, I think just being comfortable biking like 30 or 40 miles and not feeling really tired afterward is probably a good place to be. Because I mean, you'll be biking more than that. You'll be biking with maybe bags on your bikes. So I think if you're at a point where you can bike 30 or 40 miles and you're not feeling too tired, I think you're in a good spot. But definitely try to do some longer rides beforehand too. And hilly, if there's hills nearby, definitely good to practice on the hills, because you'll get some hilly days. I think the first 2 days are rather hilly, so you'll want to be accustomed to riding on hills.
And
going
did you
uphill.
prep with the weight on your bag too? Like, did you go out with your bags kind of packed with weight so you could get that feel?
I didn't do that, but that's probably a good idea. Number one, just for the strength of, riding with the weight, but also for balance, just to be accustomed to what it's like to have the weight on your bike, is a good practice.
Okay. Thank you.
And then I would recommend probably using a cardboard box, just so you don't necessarily have to be carrying a canvas bag with you for the entire journey.
Well, I'd probably so it should probably fly back with the bag.
Okay, so you're just looking for a recommendation for one that you can invest in for other uses in the future as well.
Yeah.
Or if you haven't had issues with cardboard boxes, I've seen that too. But he's been really interested in these bags, but they're pretty expensive and some have pretty poor reviews. And I just want to make sure we get his bike across America to then come back across America the right way.
Yeah, so that's tricky because any sort of hard shell one that's going to be more protective is not ideal for touring, because you don't really have anywhere to store it typically, unless in that situation where you're going to take it home or take it back. So one on wheels that's a hard shell would be great for that. But if you are planning on use it for more touring purposes, we use these ones at Teen Trucks that are like a thicker canvas bag, and they're not a guarantee. I mean, you kind of have to recognize that your touring bike could potentially be damaged, and you want to do as much as you can to wrap it inside of that canvas bag. But it's more ideal for touring because it can be rolled up and put on the back of a bicycle. So I guess it just depends on how you plan on using it more long term.
Probably it would be better to ship it, especially for this trip, because the biking doesn't start in Portland. It actually starts, I think you take the bus.
Seaside.
Is that correct? You take the bus to Seaside, Oregon, which is 2-hour bus ride away. So it might be harder logistically to get the, if you were to take it on the airplane and then off the airplane, take it on the bus, probably better off just shipping it directly to the starting location. And I think Katie would send out more information on that
Awesome. Okay.
close to the time of the trip. Also, the airlines lose a lot of bags too. I mean, FedEx could lose bags, but it seems more likely that airlines lose bags these days.
Yeah, they do. I was worried about that, so thank you. We'll ship
Okay.
it. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and also we'll be sending out we do have a training plan that we'll send out that might help you as you're biking, preparing for it. I'm gonna write it down to make sure I do. Okay. And then, does anybody else have any other questions? Tyler, I do just want to ask you before we do get off. One thing I think is really neat about your group that you did this Across America trip with is, I mean, it's been many years and you guys are all still very close and you've gotten together over the years. Can you tell us a little bit about that and that bond that you've been able to have since then?
Yeah, that's thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, that's one of the amazing parts of that group that I had, that we all kind of keep in touch with each other. We all kind of have pairs that we're especially close with, but we all see each other from time to time. We were going to have a 10-year reunion, but it ended up being 11 because of COVID. But we all got together for a weekend and all caught up together, which was really nice. And one of the people I did the trip with, he's actually getting married this year, and his one of his desires was, rather than having a bachelor party trip, was doing a little bike trip with some of the people from this trip from all these years ago. So I've been tasked with planning that, which is a lot of fun. But four of us from that trip are gonna get together again and do a bike trip. which is exciting.
That's awesome. Okay. Any last questions before we wrap it up? Well, you can always feel free to email us or call us, honestly, and we would be happy to talk to you more about this trip and logistics and planning for it, since it is a big trip, and I know there will be a lot of questions to come up, so feel free to reach out to us. And like I said, we'll be sending out more information to help prepare everyone for this trip. But otherwise, we appreciate you all joining, and stay tuned. Every 2 weeks, we do a different Edu-Series event, and always on a Wednesday night. And so we'll just keep updating that on the newsletter and our social media sites as well. But other than that, Tyler, thank you so much for sharing your experiences. And thank you everyone else for joining and for your great questions. And we hope to see you again.
Thank you so much.
Take care. Bye.